If the unraveling of the cave system was hard for the professor to describe, or how it made him feel within his notes, it must have been nearly impossible to write about how it felt when they discovered the pool with the strange runic-riddled pillars. I could live myself into the archaeologist's shoes and see them as they congratulated each other on the bizarre find. The cheers and laughter must have been loud and many for a long time within that cave. Something which makes it strange to think about now, when I know what fate had in store for them and what happened deep below the ruins of Dagenbolt Manor. The professor wrote about it in the same night as he had been studying the pool area shortly. He wasn't really sure what they had stumbled onto, but he knew that it would make headlines around the world when he had figured it out. At that time, he wrote, it felt like a place of religious consequence. Like it was some type of a worship place to a god or a goddess no one could have possibly heard about for centuries. The strangeness of the case was that the professor couldn't free himself from the fact that Erich von Dagenbolt could well have been the founder of this place and quite possibly a cult leader. Or maybe he had just been lucky or unlucky finding the place beneath his manor and wanting to make another sublevel to his already large cellar system. Could he have been blamed for being a secret cult leader? Was this why his name and his manor had been stricken from nearly every public record? The professor didn't have a clue at this point, but he seemed rejuvenated by the fresh and new leads to what had been his obsession for nearly a decade. Some days after, the team had gotten fresh supplies of a specific nature. The new generator and the working lights, together with cables and necessary tools, were brought down into the cave. When set up, the real work began, categorizing and depicting the symbols and signs on the pillars. The rest of the cave system was also explored. A lot of objects were found of the common type, as one could expect to find down in an underground area where people seemed to have spent a great deal of time. Then there was the uncommon kind, and the downright disturbing things, as the rustic chains that were still securely fastened to the cave walls. Chains that seemed to have been used to imprison either humans or animals. Uncommon things like rusty iron cages remained, big and small, as if to keep a wide variety of living things within them. Then, one of the archaeologists found weak outlines near the edge of the pool, buried beneath the dirt within the rocky surface itself. This led to the discovery of finding the whole pool were surrounded by some type of chiseled-in language none of the archaeologists had ever seen before. The professor, who seemed more and more consumed with the pool mystery, devoted pages upon pages on the matter of the nearly wiped-out language. Being an expert to the Scandinavian land's history, Professor Brandon felt he could adequately point out they had stumbled upon a very old type of runic language. It seemed to be, at least for the professor, that it could quite possibly be older than any other runic alphabet he was aware of, but why it was down in this cave and around the pool he couldn't even begin to speculate. As the mysteries kept on coming concerning Dagenbolt Manor, so too kept the questions as they got written down by the professor. Questions that went down the lines of old and lost gods dating back to even before the Norse mythology, of worship of the most bizarre kind involving human sacrifices among other things. But who was these mythical gods or creatures, and why had they been worshipped down here of all places? Had Erich von Dagenbolt played a big part in its resurrection? A resurrection that was very short-lived, yet perhaps had something to do with the Dagenbolt family's rise to wealth and power. Was the old runic language and this strange mythology something that Dagenbolt ancestors had brought with them when they came to Belgium? The questions and speculations became so many that even the professor had trouble writing them all down, something he confessed within his notes. I will leave this subject as it is, for I must confess I know very little about such things to begin with. The professor was a devoted master within these subjects, as for me I was just an investigator who tried to solve the mystery of what had happened to the archaeologists. The team had divided into several groups now. Some were still digging topside, some were searching the cave system for more objects and clues, while others were reconstructing the text around the pool together with mapping the pillars. It was from the pool itself that the sweet yet stale smell came from. No one dared to wade through the murky and shiny liquid to reach the center pillar, but a sample of it was taken to try to analyze its content. This data, which lays within the files of this case, showed that the liquid contained mostly water, but also strains of some organic substance which baffled the laboratorians who analyzed it. On the topic, they found it quite possible it was from some type of not yet discovered algae form or even possibly a mushroom crossbreed. The result, however, was that its effect, if touched, digested or even breathed, could have some unknown effect to the human psyche. To the archaeologists, this didn't matter much. They had no real need to enter the pool and would certainly not be stupid enough to drink from it. Yet, the professor went to great length in his notes, obsessing over the fact that someone should go to the pillar and search it more thoroughly. When his team refused, he got visibly upset, something Franz wrote about in his own diary about the matter. Here the notes of Professor Brandon ends. Franz's note goes on a bit further as he is assigned to the work crew topside, but he didn't shed any useful light on the matter of what had happened at Dagenbolt Manor. This in turn led us to believe that whatever happened to the team of the archaeologists, it did so very quickly. One of the theories we worked after was that there had been a killer within the group. One, or maybe more, had planned a murder which in turn set off a chain of events that led to the deaths of nearly every archaeologist at Dagenbolt Manor. Another theory was that a group of murderous thieves or treasure hunters had surprised a team of scholars, and in order to cover their tracks upon raiding the area for antiquities, they had murdered nearly everyone. The reason for such theories was the first and only dead person Marcus and I pulled out of the pool. The autopsy of this man led to the discovery of internal fractures of the ribcage and the left arm on 3 places. Some of his vertebrae were dislocated, which could have been a result of falling and being hit repeatedly with heavy blunt objects. Upon such a discovery, we sent out a large police force to try to find freshly dug graves around Dagenbolt Manor, but nothing was ever found. The large piles of stone and dirt were searched through with the help of dogs, specially trained to find dead bodies, but they too could not find any fresh human remains around the area. At some point, after a couple of weeks, the case ran really cold. Marcus and I, among others, had spent many days within the area in question without being able to solve the mystery. It was as if the earth had swallowed up Professor Brandon and the rest of his team, but they had been sucked under the murky water of the pool. We knew, though, that wasn't the case, of course, since we had drained out all the water and searched every uneven crack within that surprisingly deep basin. It was filled with thousands of average small holes at the base around the pillar, though, and some shallow straight lines at even intervals across the pool floor itself. The holes were checked for clues and only noted as going deeper down within the rocky surface at a curved downward going angle into an unknown depth. As a last effort in bringing some light to the case, I began to visit Thomas at the mental institute regularly. As far as we knew, he was the sole survivor of what had happened at the ruins of Dagenbolt Manor, and I hoped he would somehow snap out of his deranged state of mind and point me in the right direction. Any clues or hints through all his incoherent babble, large or small, could perhaps set us on the right path of understanding the case and see it perhaps in a total new light. The memories of the institute itself, a large Victorian-style mass of bricks and concrete, still makes an impression on me with its pointed roofs and high curved windows. When I close my eyes and think about it, I can still see its ivory-riddled outer walls. The patients too did a profound impression upon me, but not in a good way. Visiting those memories and seeing how the patients behaved and how they suffered within their own minds, I'm glad I never became a patient within those walls, although it was a close call there for a while. Thomas was a thin and frail-looking man, with wide-open, desperate eyes at the time, constantly searching as if looking for some hidden danger. To be honest, I don't think his facial expression and appearance has changed much over the course of time. It was as if something he witnessed down in that cavern system permanently etched itself and manifested itself within his facial features. Back then, as well as today, I couldn't do anything for him other than to feel sorry for the man. The therapist who greeted me within those walls warned me of Thomas' frail mind and incoherent speech. It was, the therapist told me, as if Thomas had withdrawn into the fabrics of his own mind, where illusions had taken over and he perceived this as reality. I was not to confront or push him towards the reality or the affairs of the cave system. The mind of Thomas was in a very delicate and fragile state, and if anything, it needed to figure things out on its own. If it chose to come back to this reality, only time would tell. The therapist didn't lie. Thomas kept mostly to himself in the area where some of the patients mingled freely inside the institute. He sat in a corner most of the time, with his back towards it, scanning the room as if always on lookout for any kind of danger. As I sat down on a bench not far from him, the first thing I noticed was that his lips were moving, but no sounds were coming out. As the time stretched on into weeks, I made it a thing to visit him as often as I could. At times he spoke, and other times his lips moved again with no words. When he spoke, it was repetitive, and always a cluster of words that had no apparent meaning when put together. At times he moved like a caged animal, trying to find an exit, whereas if the exit was something he was searching for in his own mind, as the physical exit was easy to spot from where we were. At other times, he sat rocking back and forth, repeating words as if they were a riddle he should crack. In short, it was painful to see such a highly educated man be subject to a mental trauma only he had the key to unlock and come out of. I continued to visit him until my mind too couldn't stand it any longer, and I stopped seeing him, thinking it was pointless and that it had no effect whatsoever. To my surprise, I got a call from the therapist one morning many months later. He could tell me of a change in Thomas when it came to his speech pattern. At times he would repeat the phrases "must tell the policeman," "hidden lever," and "pool swarming, bad tidings." The therapist thought it might be of some concern to what I was seeking within Thomas, as he had mentioned policeman in his new routine. I thanked the man for the information, assuring him it had been of great importance. Especially the second phrase I was sure had to do with the underground pool. Concerning the third phrase, I had no clue what it meant, although I now were sure there had to be more to the underground structure than previously thought. There had now gone by considerable time from when Marcus and I first got assigned to the case. As such, the chief was unwilling to spend much manpower on the by now cold case, but he assigned to us a couple of uniformed men to help us out in the unlikely event we should find something new below the ruins, and so we went back to the cursed place in search for this hidden lever within the cavern. Soon after, we were driving up to Dagenbolt manor as a thick winter layer had overtaken the hillside some time ago. I remember how the snow filled the air with a feeling of sobering crispiness as we walked towards the descending stairs in thick and warm winter clothing and boots within the ruins of Dagenbolt manor. I remember the four of us walking down, lighting the path with strong flashlights. I remember the smell being less imposing yet horrible to breathe. The pool area was again filled with water. Dripping sounds of small drops of water falling from above, landing into the pool. Flashlights searching nearby cavern walls. My hand feeling the wet and slimy wall. Marcus yelling excitingly, finding the lever in one of the stone pillars beside the pool. How had we missed it? I remember a deep rumbling sound and a vibration below my feet. The sound of pressurized water finding its way out into the cavern. Hot vapor filled the air, and I remember I had trouble breathing because of an indescribable smell that seemed to fill every pore of my being, threatening to suffocate and paralyze my lungs. I remember I collapsed to my knees while dropping the flashlight. I could hear Marcus and the two officers also gasping for air. I could see weak outlines of the pool shimmering with uncalmed water without understanding how or why. From it, the vapor seemed to emit. The cave swirled gently around me. I wanted to shout to the others that we had to get out, but I found my throat too occupied coughing and gasping to get anything coherent out. Instead, I headed for the exit as fast as my oxygen-starved body permitted me, and I hoped the others did the same. I seemed to remember a hissing sound, but my mind at the time could have played a gruesome trick on my senses due to inhaling that intoxicating vapor. What I know though is that I heard one of the uniformed men scream out as if in a state of shock. There was also a weak slithering sound, closely followed by a horrible tearing noise, which only fabric and meat can make. The hollow sound of bone breaking soon followed. Turning to see what was going on, I only saw the foggy outlines of a flashlight beam produced by the other policeman, who waved it back and forth within the thick vapor as he moved about, seemingly disoriented and unsure of where he was. Then Marcus came at me. God, that face. It was as if a nightmare was right on his heels, and he desperately tried to outrun it. Our eyes met, and I could for a brief moment read the frantic message his mouth couldn't scream. I waved to him to hurry up so that we could flee this pit of poison and death. Then, thin coils of dark worm-like things wrapped themselves around his feet. With a yank, my partner got pulled off his feet, and with another tug, he was gone in the surrounding thick mist. I stood only for a moment, coughing and heaving for my breath, shocked at the reality invading my mind, which didn't make any sense at all. Another moment, and somehow I was at the stairs. For each step, more and more fresh air reached my lungs. Then, something wrapped itself onto me from behind. My feet got swept away from beneath me, and I was pulled down the stairs against my will. I must have hit my head from the sudden and involuntary action, and as a result, I lost some of my consciousness because of it. I remember I was stunned to a state where I couldn't do much. The memories, as foggy as they have been to this point, I fear becomes even darker still. I have a slight sensation of being dragged across the floor of the cave. I remember suddenly being underneath the water because of the shocking coldness I felt. I felt my lungs being filled and blocked. Darkness surrounded me completely. Shots beside me and some type of creature roaring submerged in water. I drifted. Then I felt pressure on my chest, forcing water out of my lungs and air back into it. I remember seeing Marcus looking down on me, his flashlight on the ground beside us illuminating the area around us, an area which was underground yet seemed different than the cave area with the pool. I had turned to the side, still coughing and gasping for air. My mind was trying to grasp what was going on and where we were. I heard sounds as if naked feet hit wet surface echoing close by. Marcus grasped the flashlight and were suddenly gone. I felt myself drifting again. My whole body ached and my head and lungs pounded from pain. I think I remember gunshots going off, then only silence. When I again woke, it was pitch black around me and I couldn't see a thing. First confused, I believed I had been having a nightmare and just woken in my bed. Then the reality set in as I felt I was lying on a hard cold floor in still soggy clothes which made me shiver from the cold. My body, head and lungs still ached from the terrifying experience I had gone through, but that was still preferable to what my brain put me through. I remember my heart began to pound when I realized I was alone in a dark and unfamiliar area. An area I could only speculate was not around the pool anymore due to the slanting floor I remember seeing after Marcus had brought me back to life, and the waterline which was totally different than the underground area we had previously been investigating. Trying to get my shivering body and anxiety attack under control, I tried to search through all my pockets and belongings. My service pistol was still secured in its holster together with 2 extra clips. I had my badge, a pocket knife, a pack of wet and ruined gum, and a soggy notebook and pen. Getting to my feet, I pulled the gun as if on instinct, ready to shoot at anything I felt threatening. Totally disoriented, I began to move around carefully, with my empty hand outstretched, trying to listen to the faintest of sounds which could tell me something. Finding the water suddenly splashing below my feet made me squirm backwards as if I had just been attacked by the surprising sound. From there, I oriented myself, thinking how I remembered how Marcus must have pulled me out from my wet grave. Moving away from the water and of what must still be residing within it, my hand bumped into a column, which again sent my mind almost into a state of panic, and my pistol went off in a general area in front of me. Clinging to the column like it was a lifeline within a sea of darkness, I just stood there for the longest of times trying to listen if my misfire had caused any new threats to arrive. I remember how tears fell down my chin as my mind frantically tried to make sense of my newfound situation and how it desperately was trying to find a way to get out of it alive. I don't really know how I managed to press on. I knew, however, that I was freezing from my soaking wet clothes and I couldn't stay at the same spot forever. I had to try to get somewhere, find something which could point me in the right direction of the exit. Letting go of the column was like letting go of the one thing I knew was safe within a space perhaps filled with danger. I moved slowly, trying to see within my own mind that I was moving away from the water, sideways on the slight slanting floor. Finding some type of constructed wall, I met it with slightly better reaction, but still with shocking surprise. I began to follow it away from the water. Soon this wall led me to an opening, which I felt was a passageway of some kind. I cannot really describe adequately the feelings I felt when I was down there in the dark, feeling my way around, using the only solid thing I could find to guide me, and to feel it suddenly disappear into nothing. Then, how that turned into something else equally frightening as I realized the wall continued in another direction, hinting of a passageway or some other type of open space which I had no idea what contained. Not to mention not having much of a choice other than to keep on clinging to it and follow it wherever it might lead. I do not know for how long I moved blindly through the terrifying darkness, but I do remember many gaps. Gaps that I had no idea what signaled. Was it an opening of another passageway or simply opening up another cavern system? The idea of not seeing might not be as terrible to think about for those that read this, but to me in that unknown place was as if I had to take a blind leap of faith when I had to cross it. I didn't know if the ground below me would simply disappear, or if I would ever feel the safety of the damp wall ever again. When it came to if it was another room or passageway to my left, I didn't dare to enter any of them. I only moved forward in the straightest of lines I could imagine. For the longest of times I stood still too, desperately listening for any kind of threats within the open spaces to my sides before I risked crossing the unknown. A crossing that felt like swimming at night on the open sea without knowing what lay before you in any direction or what terrors could suddenly come at you from any angle. I remember how strange it was to suddenly see something within the darkness. My lips let out a whimper, I know, for the sound made me jump in surprise from the silence I had been used to wade through, only penetrated by occasional dripping sounds and accompanied by my own footsteps and quickened, rasping breath. Feelings again overtook me, and more tears left my eyes when in front of me, far up ahead, a weak light shone to the right. Cautiously, as I didn't want to make a sound, I came up to the glowing tunnel to the right. I cannot really say what was worst, the fumbling terror in the dark, or the fear of what was causing the light up ahead. I feared it would disappear again and leave me in the dark, but then I also feared what was in it, and if that would be something my mind wouldn't be able to process. It took every ounce of my courage to peek into the tunnel of light. Relieved and puzzled, I saw not far into it a glow on the floor which only could be a flashlight. Taking a few steps towards it, I stopped again, listening intently. Finally, I braved a whisper bearing Marcus's name, but immediately regretted making the sound. No sounds or voices greeted me, and so I went over to the light, picking it up after looking around suspiciously. The mix of feelings which I felt is hard to put into words. I felt like a god with the power to penetrate the dark. Then again, I identified the flashlight to be Marcus's, and so also a terrible feeling went through me, as I now feared for his well-being. I scanned my surroundings quickly. Two things stood out in my mind of utmost importance. Where was Marcus, and how long did I have before the batteries died within the stick of light? I found no Marcus anywhere, but I seemed to be inside of a highly raised stone-bricked room, barren of any furniture or man-made objects. A fresh spray of blood adorned one of the walls together with a large pool on the floor. It was a feeling of almost despair that went through me when I saw the red fluid around me. I feared the worst, but I really didn't have the luxury to stand and try to figure out what had happened. Something bad had transpired here, with no doubt, but I had to get moving if I ever were to get out of the strange surroundings I were in. Also, I knew the best I could do for Marcus was to look for him on the move, so I left the chamber and began to move the same way as I had moved while blinded by the darkness. My movement went so much quicker now, and so I passed empty chamber after chamber on my path which seemed to have no end. I remember how small I felt when moving through the tunnel and looking into the oversized high-arched rooms which came up from time to time. My surroundings had truly been made with the intent to impress back in the day, and I couldn't help but to occupy my mind with the questions of who they could have been and why they had done so. I do not remember when I got aware of it, but suddenly it was there, a faint smell of burnt meat. I suppose it reached me as the tunnel I was in began to slant gently downwards. Feeling I had no choice, and wanting nothing else but to get out of this sub-level area, I followed the downwards going corridor. The stench of burnt flesh became stronger as I began to detect another light source further down below me. Turning off the flashlight, and moving as quietly as I could with the pistol in my other hand, I soon came to where the tunnel ended. There, 3 large holes in an uneven intervals shone a strange weak light down into what must have been an enormous dome-like cave. The distant sounds of rushing water told me there was an underground river nearby as well. For a long time I stood in a tunnel opening, just looking in disbelief and trying to understand what I saw in the light. There were human-like silhouettes hanging from the holes above the floor. Laying all around and on top of each other as if it was a large pile were other human-like shapes and things I couldn't quite make out. It was a gruesome sight, something which my mind just couldn't accept. Inspecting the area closely, I could detect no movement either in the shadows or within the circle of light. It was as if everyone was sleeping, yet my mind screamed at me that this was something else. With my weapon in hand, I began to move towards the nearest human pile carefully, trying to determine if the area was safe to walk through. Within the light, I began to see more details about the human shapes. They wore modern clothing, although they seemed dirty, bloodied and ragged. A male figure in front of me at the base of the pile seemed oddly wrong somehow, although I couldn't really place it. Coming closer, I risked turning on the flashlight only to see his head had been smashed somehow and his face was unrecognizable. Focusing the flashlight upon the pile, I saw numerous dead people on top of what seemed like bones. They had all been ripped open in some way and were missing some limbs. Looking upwards, a shocked scream must have left my mouth or my soul, for I remember I looked around myself as if I had suddenly made a loud noise. A man had been hanged with his own entrails, his face a mask of bloated shock and terror. Forcing my gaze away, I shone my light around, trying to focus on finding someone I could recognize, but also hoping I would know no one. Some of the dead bodies seemed to wear some type of primitive animal skin clothing, while others wore the modern Western world's fabrics. Of the few faces which weren't touched by any types of bludgeoning or sharp objects and were otherwise clean enough to look upon, I identified as some of the missing people from the archaeology team. Silently as I could, I walked around and inspected the countless bodies that lay strewn about around the three sources of light. A particular white male struck me as oddly familiar. Missing all of his innards and the left leg, he bore the close resemblance of Professor Brandon. A satchel of brown leather lay close by the corpse. Inspecting it, I found a small handwritten, bloody and dirty book that bore his signature. Not really having the time to read it, I put it in my inner pocket of my winter clothing before searching through the rest of the bodies. A distant scream from above made me freeze in my movements. I thought I had recognized the voice as Marcus, although I couldn't be sure. Then, other screams reached me through the cave from above me, sounding like the same voice. God, those screams. I don't think I will ever forget them, no matter how many hours of therapy I go through. It sounded like a man in so much pain and suffering that I wished nothing more than to make the screams stop. And just as quickly as they had started, they faded away. For a long time, I could do nothing else than to look up at the lights in the cavern roof, wondering what was going on up there. Then, a figure came suddenly falling down from one of the holes. With a thud, it hit some of the other bodies on the piles, and suddenly I knew why all the bodies lied in such a strange manner in the circle of light. Rushing over to the new body, I quickly identified my partner Marcus. As like the others, he had been mutilated and were missing human parts, which again told me without a doubt Marcus was beyond saving. That, however, didn't prevent me from screaming out in sheer anger and frustration. It was inconceivable and downright maddening to witness my own partner dead and mangled in such a gruesome way. Two of the three holes above me got blocked soon after by large shadows. Looking back up, I could see two faces looking down towards me with what seemed like red eyes. There was something, too, about the unusual shapes and large sizes of the things above me which blocked the holes that made me feel small. An uncanny feeling of staring up into something that were human-like, but not quite human, made my skin crawl and my spine tingle. I'm sure you will understand that I reacted purely on instinct as true bone-chilling fear struck deep within me. My hands raised up, and the pistol got aimed at one of the faces above me. 3 shots hit the center mass, and an unearthly sound filled the cavern a moment before the faces withdrew. One on its own accord, and one forcefully shrinking back. Then all types of commotion started above me. My brain began to process finally the magnitude of the cave, the faces, and the high tunnels and rooms I had been walking around in and passing through. Whatever these things were, they were large. Larger than me, human-like but not really human, and now I seemed to have done the only thing I shouldn't have done. Tripping and sliding over the many bodies that lie around me, I began to move towards the tunnel I had come from with unsteady legs. Casting my eyes towards the holes revealed only shadows moving around them, blocking the light source now and then, all seemingly to move in one specific direction. There was something within me which told me to run, but my body was slow to respond. A terrifying and numbing feeling had crept into me, almost paralyzing my will to move and even to think. My memories are a haze from the time in those nether regions at best. I have, though, used a lot of time to puzzle as much as I can together, even though I see them only as separate scenes and not in one fluid motion. I seem to recall a sound which reached me within that system of caves. A sound of many rushing heavy naked feet. I see my own legs running, lungs hurting, and the sound of my own frantic struggling breath, starved for oxygen, is dominating my ears. Still I seem to push my body to its very limit of what it could do. The chamber with water comes into view. Without pausing, I start to wade into the water, catching my breath as the stomping feet comes closer. For some reason, I preferred the certainty of death within the water rather than the unknown monstrosities which were rapidly approaching. Drowning felt at the time more blissful compared to what they had done to poor Marcus. God, those glowing red eyes, and enormous misshaped human-like faces. I dive down into the water, feeling my way downwards by the stone-lined ground. I'm unsure of how long I'm down there, but I don't see anything. A feeling of weird gravitation overtakes me. Up becomes suddenly down, and down becomes up. I am confused, lost. Then I see it. Lights above me. So close. My lungs scream for air. Then I break the surface. Eager hands pulls me out. Faces and bodies in police uniforms shouting and pulling me away from the circle of water. Something again breaks the surface behind me. The vapor makes it difficult to breathe. I yell to the officers around me to shoot. Shoot the horror that has come for us all. Some do, others don't. I'm pulled towards the stairs by strong hands yelling over my own protesting and struggling body. I want to fight. I want to revenge my partner. We reach the stairs. There is a sound like an explosion. Men and women's screams are blanked out. The cavern collapses. How much time has passed since that terrible day? The day when our police department lost so many. I often get confused when trying to think about this, you see, and a time when I was seemingly transported to somewhere else. I have heard many times over that Marcus, the two other policemen and myself had been missing for 48 hours when the police force arrived at the Dagenbolt manor. I know I lost track of time when I was trying to find my way within the darkness and that I was very disoriented at the time. But it doesn't really sit right with me that 2 whole days went by when I was within that other place. At these days though, it feels like time is a manipulative thing which doesn't follow any logic at all, and I quite often find I have holes in my memory. My psychologist points to the unhealthy and possibly hallucinational vapor which contains strains of mushrooms and algae when it comes to my symptoms. The psychologist also believes this could quite possibly be a solution or an answer to why everyone who breathed in the vapor saw the same thing. A source of mass hysteria where we all got infected and intoxicated by the same thing. Seeing nightmare-like creatures and experiencing a trip through water as if everyone went to another place. I do tend to believe people who try to heal sickness within the mind, but when it comes to this case, I don't get this theory to fit. It could have been a good explanation though, if it wasn't for the disappearance of all those people. I can't get it to fit, as I know what I saw within those rings of light. I know I saw Marcus and what those horrible monstrosities above had done to him. Well, we'll never get a good answer to this case now, I suppose. The higher-ups called it a tragic day with catastrophic events, but in reality it came as a blessing, I am sure, that the nether structure of Dagenbolt Manor collapsed in such a manner as it did. Of everything I have written, the thing you might have the least trouble with to doubt is the amount of cover-up everyone had to do around here to keep this case a secret. Everyone that was reported missing has now been declared dead thanks to my report of what I saw and experienced. The area itself has been deemed too dangerous and treacherous to work on and to even be around. Everything has been blamed on the collapse. I must also admit I've signed a sworn statement of secrecy to never speak of this again publicly. Even so, I felt it was my duty to write down a strong warning of what happened at Dagenbolt Manor. Why, if these documents ever resurface by young and eager researching hands, you should not ever start to dig around in the case of Dagenbolt Manor. I'm also adding Professor Brandon's puzzling notebook to the case file. It's a bit washed and wrinkled from 2 trips within the watery depths of the pool. Mostly, its text is garbled by now, but there were some pages within the small book I could understand. It told of Professor Brandon and his team of archaeologists' last findings before the disappearance. Also about a theory he didn't have the time to prove, but on the way of studying when it comes to the circle around the water. Professor Brandon thought it could have been some type of summoning spell. Another theory was of an incantation to open a portal, and a third possibility, a warding holding whatever entity was inside and underneath the pool's first layer at bay, or even quite possibly to hinder it from coming up and into the cavern system. The bridge for the summon was speculated to be the water itself, and it served as a gateway between worlds, how strange as that might seem. I like to think the last theory to be true, even though how profound it might seem. I do not know where I was or where it sent me, and the others went when it latched onto us, but the strange creatures I encountered which looked down upon and chased me. I just hope they do not dwell somewhere deep within the earth, somewhere below Dagenbolt Manor, but that they do belong in another realm entirely. So there you have it, you who now have read these pages. I hope you understand now why this case was wrapped up in such haste and dulled down in secrecy. I have said it before within these notes, but I will say it again as a way to end this document. Do not try to dig up whatever lies below the ruins of Dagenbolt Manor. Sincerely yours, Isaac Johansen.